So why are the boundaries that have been relatively firm for the best part of a century now being redrawn? Is there any hope of a return to a more peaceful, settled region? And what does it mean for us here in the West? With me to discuss this are Wada Kanfar, co-founder of the Shark Forum and former Director General of Al Jazeera, the television station. He's in Doha. In Dubai, we have Ali Kaderi, the longest continuously serving American official in Iraq. And from Tel Aviv is Ephraim Halevi, the former Director of Israel's intelligence service, Mossad. In the studio here with me is Professor Fawaz Gerges from the London School of Economics and the Egyptian activist and author Adaf Soueif. Good evening to you all. Mr. Kanfar, if I could start by asking you, do you believe that the Middle East is entering perhaps its most unstable and dangerous phase for many decades?
Actually, I do believe that, and I do believe maybe this is the phase of real transformation. Maybe this is the most difficult time that the Middle East is going since 1917, since the First World War, when the boundaries and the borders of the so-called Middle East were drawn by Sykes and Picot. I think right now there are trends that are combined together that might change and reshape the region. One of them is the rise of generals and military versus the decline of politics. The other one is the fact that the regional system is collapsing and the boundaries and the borders amongst countries in this region are becoming more irrelevant than ever. The third is the delegitimization, actually, of the state, because the state is not seen as an actor that represents the hopes and aspirations of the public, and that is also adding to this. And the fourth component, the fact that democracy doesn't exist anymore. 3 years ago, all of us celebrated at Tahrir Square, and we thought that we are going into a new phase of values-centered system that will restructure the Middle East based on democracy. But democracy has been murdered, actually, in Egypt, has been murdered across the region. And thanks to the silence of the international society and the collaboration of regional powers, I think we are going through this phase where ISIS has become an actor, and more people are moving towards an alternative out of despair and feeling of betrayal.
Ali Kaderi, this sounds like total disaster. Is this unstoppable chaos?
It is indeed a disaster, generally speaking. The fact is the region is more unstable now than it has been in a century. I agree with Mr. Kanfar on that front. And these historic trends are not always easily predictable, so it's hard to say whether it's unstoppable or not, but certainly the forces of history are moving very quickly, and we all have to be very careful, particularly in the West, to preserve our strategic alliances and be on guard for strategic foes like Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and other radical Islamist groups, which are clearly gaining momentum across the region.
Now, if we could just move on to this question of borders and whether the map is being redrawn. Now, there are those who simply argue that the existing borders were an imposition of colonial powers like Britain, and that therefore they were always at some point going to collapse because they don't reflect the cultural, racial, economic realities. Is that your view, Professor Gerges, that what we're seeing is inevitable?
Partially. I mean, the modern Middle East was invented by the colonial powers. And the modern state system was not economically, socially viable. It's not viable, period. But I think we simplify, Robert, a great deal if we say this is a matter of boundaries. Even though the modern state system was seen as illegitimate, it has taken deep roots in the region since the 1920s. I think the crisis is bigger. I think the crisis, what we're witnessing in the Middle East now, is a revolutionary moment, a moment that's really comparable to the great revolutionary moments in history, whether you're talking about the French Revolution or the Russian revolutions. What we are witnessing unfolding before our eyes, fierce social and political struggles, bottom-up politics. The system has been turned upside down. You have civil wars, you have ideological wars. The old system is resisting the counter-revolutionary forces in the region. A new system is not born yet. And I think it would be a mistake to say that this is the end of the story. It's going to take many years for the dust to settle on the battlefield in many countries in the region.
Araf Soueif, you were a great supporter, indeed activist in the Arab Spring. But given the chaos we are now seeing and atrocities on a really terrifying scale, do you think that actually what we saw then has turned out to be a rather dangerous and bad thing?
No, I don't, not at all. And I would say that I was an activist on behalf of the Egyptian revolution. I think the Arab Spring as a term is very problematic.
But even in Egypt, you know, we've had democracy over, well, you know, an elected president thrown out. It hasn't worked, has it?
It hasn't worked so far. I think that the example of Dr. Morsi being dethroned is problematic because it was certainly done in the wrong way, but it was actually reflective of the will of the people. The people will probably live to regret it, but we were in the process of a revolution. I think it's really strange how people talk about historic processes taking place in the region as though they were talking about natural phenomena, while in fact there are actors making things happen. What is happening in Gaza now is being done by Israel. It's an act of the will which is repeated day in, day out. It's not an inevitable historic process, and it's very much part of what is destabilizing the region and making life difficult. I think we need to remember that the Islamic or Islamist movements all started as protest movements, all started as dissident movements against autocratic dictatorial regimes, and then of course they take the path that they take in the long absence of victory. I think also Iraq. I mean, again, talking about a historic process in Iraq and how it's breaking up, and talking about racial, ethnic, religious divides, Sunni and Shia. Let's just remember what the United States did there. Let's just remember that this entire region, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Palestine, was all a unit that worked, and that worked for hundreds and hundreds of years with this entire
But I'm afraid we are where we are now, and I think we've now got to sort of move on to the issue of shifting alliances. And if I could talk to you, Ephraim Halevi, it is pretty widely recognised that what ISIS is doing in fracturing Iraq, fracturing Syria, committing terrible atrocities, is, you know, pretty appalling. Was the West simply mistaken in turning against President Assad in Syria? Mr. Halevi, can you hear me?
I think that the West, I think that the West miscalculated on Syria, like almost everybody else miscalculated on Syria. I don't think that the Assad regime would have survived today without the support of three outside elements. One are the Hezbollah from Lebanon, who are fighting on Syrian soil and are carrying much of the brunt of the battle. The other is Iran, which also has boots on the ground today. And the third is Russia, which is supplying the Assad regime with the necessary weaponry in order to maintain its supremacy in the battlefield. And that, I think, is something which we have to take into account today, no less than what you have mentioned up to now. We have a situation in the Middle East where on the one hand we had known state actors like the Hamas and the Hezbollah, and we have other non-state actors which are becoming semi-independent, like the Kurdish region in northern Iraq. So the situation is varied in the Middle East, and many things are happening simultaneously.
Mr. Khanfa,
and it would be wrong to lump everything together.
Mr. Khanfa, if I could just ask you, do you think we have to, in a sense, simply accept that a sort of new caliphate is being created by ISIS and accommodate it?
I think this is a phenomenon that has risen out.
Sorry, can I just ask Mr. Khanfa, if I could? Yeah. Sorry, go on, please.
Now, I think this is a phenomenon that has risen out of this kind of chaos and despair, and the feeling of lack of hope in the future, and feeling that the channels of real change and reform have been blocked, and the feeling of humiliation. Actually, it is not only ISIS and the Khilafat, it is what's happening right in Gaza that's going to even radicalize the Arab world further and maybe accumulate all that kind of anger and feeling of humiliation and direct it towards a cause that resides in the hearts of the Arabs and Muslims and unify them. So what I see right now in Gaza is actually might become a beginning of a new trend in the region where all these kind of problems might be directed towards the cause, which we call it the cause of Palestine. The Israelis at this moment are committing maybe suicide in provoking a nation that is going through transformation, and Israelis who are now bombarding our images, our TV screens, our mobile phones with images of civilians have been killed. I think this is going to be very deep, even much worse than whatever we have experienced in Iraq and any other place.
We'll come back to that in a second, but before we move on to the issue of the threat to all of us, I've just got one further question on this issue, which is to you, Mr. Kaderi, and it's really this, which is America appears to have shown itself utterly powerless. I mean, John Kerry's attempts to broker, for example, peace over Palestine have failed miserably. What should America be doing in this situation?
Well, indeed, we've noticed a remarkable series of American foreign policies over the last 15 years or so. Obviously, President George W. Bush was an ultra-activist, and now President Obama is essentially an isolationist, essentially withdrawing from most parts of the Middle East in favor of what is essentially an isolationist policy. I think it is critical for the United States and for Washington to actively re-engage with the region, with all of our regional allies, the Israelis, the Gulf Arab countries, the Egyptians, the Turks in Baghdad and in Erbil, because what is clearly evident over the past several years is that with the American vacuum that's been left under the Obama administration in the region, world powers and regional powers are trying to fill that vacuum. For example, in Iraq, obviously there's a proxy war that's being waged between Iran, some of the Gulf Arab countries or individuals, wealthy individuals, and for example, Turkey. The same thing is occurring in Syria. As Mr. Halevi said, there's a proxy war that's being waged again between some Gulf money, and clearly the Russians, Hezbollah, and the Iranian Revolutionary Guards are involved. So it's a very unstable situation. And one thing I continue to hear from, frankly, all of our regional allies, our historic allies, is that they feel that the Obama administration is disengaged, and many regional leaders are counting down the days for Obama to leave office, hopeful that a future American president will re-engage with the region, support its allies, and go on the offensive against historic foes like the Iranian Revolutionary Guards or Al-Qaeda.
I've got to move us on now to the issue of the general threat, both within the region and to the rest of the world. And I'd therefore like to pick up with you, Professor Gerges. Do you agree with Mr. Khanfar that broadly what we're seeing in the Palestinian territories has the potential to spark, a really devastating wider Middle East conflagration?
It really does. I mean, one point we must make very clear is that the Palestinian tragedy resonates deeply, not just in the imagination of Palestinians, in the imagination of Arabs and Muslims and worldwide. What's happening, the Israel savage attack in Gaza has already made, Hamas a popular movement in the eyes of millions of Palestinians. There is a major shift in Palestinian public opinion. Hamas is seen as a symbol of defiance, resisting Israel's massive military machine, resisting Israel's occupation of Palestinian lands. In many ways, we are witnessing the making not only of a third intifada, but a wider regional conflict as a result of the massacres and the slaughters in Gaza.
Araf Swaif, where do you see this going in terms of the impact on the West?
Well, it depends what attitudes the West has, I suppose. The West has a huge role and a huge responsibility, and it has been engaged. We've had the quartet, we've had Tony Blair flying in and out of the region, sort of ad infinitum. The
presumption here is, though, that there should be no military intervention from America, Britain, Europe. Do you agree with that?
Well, unless they would like to create a no-fly zone over Gaza, and unless they would like to put a military embargo on Israel, which would be really useful. I mean, there's a very strong call for that from all sectors of civil society now.
If I could ask Mr. Halevi for a second, what do you think the terrorist threat might be from all of this outside of the region?
Allow me just a minute to comment and to reply to some of the comments which have just been made, because I think it's only fair to allow me to say something about some of the statements just made. First of all, I'd like to make it clear that the Hamas, which controls Gaza, is a terrorist organization. It is not an organization which has been pronounced terrorist just by Israel. It's been pronounced terrorist by the government of Egypt, which, as you know, has a border with Gaza. It has been pronounced a terrorist organization not only by the United States of America, but also by many states in Europe. And methods that Hamas are using are terrorist methods, which are supported, amongst others, by Iran today, just as Iran is active in Syria. So I don't think that this is simply a question of the Hamas being the mouthpiece of the Palestinian movement. I'm sure President Abbas of the Palestinian Authority would not take this line of thinking, and neither do I. I think, therefore, that we should not discuss the Palestinian issue in this manner as an adjunct to all the other problems. If we want to focus on the general problems in the region, that is fine. If you want to turn to the Palestinian issue, I am willing to discuss it in detail. You have to discuss whatever it is you want to discuss,
we have got more on Israel later in the programme, and we have to move on at this stage. I really just want to ask Mr. Khanfar whether at this particular juncture you see any hope for stability returning to the region.
Absolutely. I think we are going through a phase in our history whereby we are trying to find some kind of consensus, political consensus. You should remember that this region has been deprived from having this kind of dynamics for decades. We have been ruled by authoritarian regimes. We have been ruled by wrong systems, by delegitimized states, by states that have never lived up to the hopes of the public. And right now we found that we have that space. There are many issues to be settled. The issues of identity, the issues of sectarianism, the issues of democracy, the issues of Palestine. And I definitely emphasize that it is at the heart of the change. I cannot talk about a new Middle East without speaking about the location of Palestine.
This debate